Now, I first encountered the term progressive punk when I was doing a reaction video to a Cardiac song. To be honest, I honestly thought I coined the term, but that claim is under dispute, so I'll hold off on the copyright filing for now. In any event, there seems to be another band wishing to lay claim to that label at this moment. So of course, I had to give a listen to their album. So what do I think of Great Wide Nothing's newest album, A Shout Into the Void? Well, you're about to find out. Hey Prog-Noggins, Dave here, and this is Bleeding Edge with your almost weekly album review. Yes, I know, I took a bit of a lengthy break there, but I was doing other things and I got busy. So, getting back on track, A Shout Into the Void is the new album from Atlanta-based, self-described prog-punk band Great Wide Nothing. Now this band consists of just 3 people: Daniel Graham on bass, vocals, and lyrics, Dylan Porper on keyboards and vocals, and Jeff Matthews on drums and vocals. Also, everybody does vocals in this band. It's kind of like Triumph that way with 3 dudes, but definitely not Canadian. So Daniel and Dylan did handle the production duties on this one, so basically self-produced. Not basically nothing, it literally is. Clocks in at 45 minutes on 8 songs, not 85 minutes over 4 songs, although that would be an impressive accomplishment. I'm not going to edit that. I'm leaving it there. So the brief overview, is it a concept album? I can't say for sure, but it certainly does dig into a lot of very current socio-political themes that are pertinent to the modern world, especially here in the US. But I don't see anything anywhere where they claim it to be a thematic concept album. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. Honestly, I think mostly they've been watching the news a lot, and it's just really shaped Daniel's lyrical content. Kind of happens sometimes when you watch a lot of the same thing a lot. All right, anyway, before we start the breakdown, I just want to say don't forget to take a moment, like and subscribe to the channel if you could. And also my methodology, as always, I do a breakdown into 4 categories for each album, and that would be intellectual, innovative, technical, and emotional. And then I score those on a scale of 1 to 5. I'm now adding fractions. One of the suggestions at the halfway point of the year, so I am taking that to heart. I'm going to see how that goes. And that's what I do, just so we know. I might or might not add what I call the enjoyment modifier at the end if I feel that the raw numbers that come out of those categorical scores doesn't quite fit or match my own personal experience of the album. So here we go. We're going to start off, as always, with intellectual. Now, I'm going to say this is an album very much of the modern day, with an eye towards just how political and economic forces have eroded our social cohesion, especially here in the U.S. Clear he's been watching the news a lot and been very much inspired / affected / impacted by everything that's going on. And what I take away from this is Daniel has a very impressive observational mind and a poetic wit that is both direct and deft. In other words, you always know what he's talking about, but the man is really good at doing it in a almost playful way, a satirical way, or sometimes a bitingly sarcastic way. His ability to cut to the chase with clever turns of phrase and yet still create catchy, singable choruses honestly is on par with the likes of Elvis Costello and Andy Partridge, I would say. Guys like that. So he's no slacker, even by a little bit. And for me, anybody that can work in a George Carlin quote in their lyrics gets my admiration. I'm going to give him a 4.5 on this. There's my first fraction ever on a score. 4.5 for intellectual. Moving on to innovation. Now, I don't really know what their intent was, obviously, but for me, what I'm hearing is a very strong early 80s lo-fi new wave vibe with this album. I feel like, honestly, if I traveled back in time to Tower Records on South Street, I would not be surprised to find this thing already created and nestling on the racks near early Ice House or the Hooters' actual first album, which is not Nervous Night, by the way, folks, you non-Philadelphia area people. And I don't say that at all as a criticism. Honestly, I find it rather endearing. I like it. And I have to wonder if this is perhaps where the self-applied label of prog-punk comes into play. That what we have is a band with these prog-level musicianship chops and a garage band do-it-yourself mentality and a lo-fi production aesthetic. That's what I'm thinking is quite possibly what happened, or it could be completely intentional and they wanted to evoke that era. I don't know. But we do get a potpourri of keyboard sounds reminiscent of that transitional period between the 70s and Duran Duran hitting the world. Got synths and Moog and Hammond organ and piano. At least I think that's what I'm hearing. I think I hear all of those in there. I'm not going to guarantee any of it, but it's got an absolute minimum of studio polish applied to it. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they actually got themselves some high-grit sandpaper and took that to some parts that accidentally came out too smooth just to roughen them up a little bit. Meanwhile, add in a lead vocal sound and a style akin to what one would get. I wrote this shit for myself. And they spent all day pissing off Malcolm Galloway and set him loose on karaoke night. There's a same vulnerability in the vocal style, but the lines are just spit out with just a bit of Johnny Rotten venom in the mix. So it's interesting and, admittedly, probably for some people a bit of an acquired taste more than anything, but it's still got that we did this all in the local tiny studio on one take kind of feel to it, from the vocals to the music to everything. Now, nothing sounds exactly what you would call new here, but in my mind, it's an intriguing mix in the little ways that it will surprise you as well, because there are some aspects of this album that, based on that description, you wouldn't expect. So all in all, I'm giving the score on innovation a 3.5. The extra 0.5 just for the idea of combining prog with early 80s new wave lo-fi vibe. Now, moving on to technical. Now, whenever the word punk is part of the description, I figure it's easy to assume there's an average, just an average level of musicianship on display at best. Now, there are exceptions, but hey, the main premise of punk was to bring the music back from the pretentious virtuosity of prog to the people by making it simple, making it easy, and in some ways even completely eschewing trying to play well at all. That's what punk was about back in the day. These guys said screw that, and they light the place up at points throughout the album, and often when least expected. Now, we're not talking Dream Theater level here, but much closer to that than you might expect going in, based on all this description. The bass lines are frenetic and propulsive, and the keys, whether synth, organ, or piano, are fluidly mesmerizing without really ever resorting to excess, a la, well, we know who a la. We know who's guilty of that. I've been so caught up in both of those, I realize, in listening to the album that I fear I've honestly neglected to listen to the drums, though perhaps that was intended. I have to think back. I'll have to check it out. Maybe the idea was that the drums focus on the rhythmic backbone without getting in the way of those other primary instruments. And yeah, if you haven't noticed what I've talked about so far, it's rather unusual to hear no guitars here. This is prog, this is punk, this is prog-punk, bass, keyboards, drums, no guitar. And yet these three guys make a rather glorious noise, I gotta say. I have to imagine this is a band that is a blast to see live. I picture them bringing a ton of energy to a venue. I'm scoring them a 4 on this category. And finally, moving on to the final category, as always, emotional. Now, I know, I got a reputation for the emotional ratings, but I'm going to surprise you a little bit here. So, the sonic tapestry of this album sounds and vibes so much with early 80s new wave that meets prog that it, for me, pushes the nostalgia button quite hard. I gotta say, I was surprised how much I found this sound endearing. And it reminds me so much of that period when music was evolving away from the blues-based rock of the 70s and into something more adventurous, but before the studio gloss and MTV glam came along and coated everything in plastic and sugar. And really, for me, the closer, Can't speak today. But finally, for me, the closer and the title track is gloriously determined and almost defiant, and yet at the same time wistfully beautiful. It's a mission statement. It's mostly piano, backed by restrained bass and drums, and featuring a passionately angelic choir in the second half, in the final closing moments of the song. That one is such a digression from the punchy, punky snark of the rest of the album and the dripping cynicism and the just, seething under the surface anger at times and frustration. It was absolutely an immediate emotional gut punch for me. It just elevated the rest of the album beyond what might otherwise have been. And that's just speaking for myself, and it does it for me every time. So, this album I am scoring a 4 for emotional. All right, now let's recap. Intellectual, 4.5. Innovative, 3.5. Technical, 4. Emotional, 4. That gets us a raw score of 4. Not much of a deviation from what I've been doing all the rest of the year, even with the fractions added. Well, we'll see. We'll continue doing it, see what happens. Moving on, additional thoughts on this album. I have to say, the lead vocals are serviceable, being at times almost shouted or borderline spoken, sometimes very rapidly, and that's a bit where the punk comes in, often dripping with anger, and yet there's this fragile vulnerability to them. But for me, it's when the backing vocals are added, either in harmonies or as backing vocals, doing separate things from the lead vocal, that these songs are really at their best. The backing vocals are the secret sauce here that both elevate the proceedings and also add to that early 80s vibe in a way that you don't really expect. They're doing things that you just don't hear bands do that much anymore. Now, I'll admit, they almost lost me with the opening track. I'm going to be perfectly frank there. It's a track that opens with this really cool synth tone that just builds slowly into a musical trot and kind of gets things moving, and then it kicks in like one of the Cure's punchier early tracks. Again, still lo-fi, but it still had that kind of feel, and the bass was really front and center. And after all the crescendos, those vocals on this song, kicking in after all that build-up, absolutely nearly lost me. And it's probably one of the punkiest parts in the album, but man, it was a jarring transition, I have to admit. The two things just didn't go together. I was built up to expect one thing and already and salivating for that, and then poof, in the face. And in their defense, they had the misfortune that I had just finished listening to two other albums that I was maybe going to review, where the vocals were really annoying me. Both of them were really annoying me. And here it is, I pick up this third album, and I'm moving into the first song, and I was primed to give up early. Damn near did, but I'm really glad I didn't, gotta tell you. So the highlight tracks in this, Rules of Engagement, tends more on the rock side of things, and in many ways reminding me of some early 80s stadium rockin' parts, it was pretty cool, straight ahead kind of thing here, not so punky, not so proggy, but somewhere in the middle of all those, and having a chorus that is driven by a galloping phrasing in the words and keys that manage to subtly ratchet up the urgency throughout. Really nicely done. I really dug the way that one turned out. Meanwhile, You're Not In goes from spacey at the beginning to almost, I guess what I called a mechanical inevitability. It feels like, picture one of those cartoons with the mechanical things, and you hear that industrial music, and it just feels like it's it's moving you forward. It doesn't sound exactly like that, but you get the idea. It just feels like you're on a conveyor belt, and you're going forward whether you want to or not. And it just has that feel to it. And that moves into this manic bridge, and then to a super catchy sing-along chorus. It's really very cool. And in the sense that it sounds so sing-along, and there's so much rhyming going on, you almost want to think of it as being trite until you really pay attention to the lyrics. Any other band, any other artist might make this stuff feel cheesy. And all right, maybe it still does, I don't know. Except for the biting lyrics about a rigged system culminating with one of George Carlin's most cynical and yet prescient lines.
It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
I can't say how much I was and am moved by the title track, though. A Shout Into the Void, let's face it, it's the perspective of every one of us small guys on this website, on this venue that is YouTube, and throughout the world in various places, trying to reach others of like mind or to make a difference in other ways or whatever way we can. We are all of us out here in many ways busting our asses, putting our hearts and our minds on our sleeves. And we hope we're going to be making an impact. And yet so much of we do can feel like just shouting into the void. You never know whether you're going to make a difference. You never know whether you have made a difference. You never know if anybody cared. And yet we're still going to try. We keep going. And that's it. The message of hope in the face of hopelessness is so wonderfully expressed in this song. This one absolutely hits the right emotional chords for me and goes right on my list for Song of the Year at this point in time. Right in the mix for that, and it's got a good chance of being very high up there. It is. It's all of us doing what we do out here and hoping anybody anywhere out there gives a shit. Simple as that. In the end, I gotta say, this album scores a lot of points for me on the nostalgic touches and that whole David versus Goliath mentality, the mix of anachronistic composition and production with that prog level chops. And yet, all that going on, I think the raw score hits just right for me. I don't feel the need to move it up or down one way or another. When I look at the other albums I have talked about this year and compare, this one fits right up there, and this is near the top. Final score is a 4. Now, I want to hear your thoughts. If you haven't given this one a listen yet, go do that. Don't waste time. And honestly, maybe a couple of listens, because this one is more of a grower than it is immediate. I think it's a couple of listens before you really start to pick up the charms that are inherent in this album. And what about those of you who've already heard it? Do you hear what I hear? Did you pick up what I heard? Do you see it the same way as I do? Were you old enough to really honestly remember and experience that early 80s new wave period? Let me know your thoughts, because if you don't use the comments section, someday you might not have one. And no, I do not know what that means. I have no clue. And if you don't want to comment, there's always the like and subscribe buttons. They're fun too. You can go ahead and do that. That is good as a comment in my world. Meanwhile, coming up next time, we go from a small upstart of a band to one of the classics. You might have noticed Styx has a new album, and I've already been listening to it. So, watch this spot. The review is coming up. And finally, as always, I leave you with a reminder to never fear to deviate from the norm, and as always, keep it proggy.